Welcome to the Always Right podcast. I am your host, Jamie Vendera, and this is...
Author Carissa DeLay.
I thought he was going to get Author Carissa DeLay or something like
No,
that.
not today, darling. Today I'm just going to be here listening to you talk.
All right, well, this is... Boy, I don't have a lot to say because we're covering prologues versus epilogues. And what's there to say? There's not a lot to say. There's a little bit to say, so I'll say something.
But the thing is, we need to cover this topic. It's an important topic to cover because sometimes people don't realize what they are, if their story needs it or doesn't need them.
Yeah, I use prologues. I use them in, I'm pretty sure, like the Feral series. And I give a breakdown. Like, I want to have a scene that isn't directly related to the beginning of the book. So in some of my books, and I'll have like, the world is coming to an end and they released this virus and they didn't know what they were doing. And then they blew up half the planet. And then people died and then they turn into half creatures called ferals. And then you go to a cutscene like in apocalyptic New York with this young girl named Pippa Race. I did that because I think if you're starting a new book series and you have all these ideas, you've built this world, sometimes it doesn't make sense to hop right into what you see as that opening scene. You need some backstory to know how we got here so they're not confused. I'm not saying they won't find it out after a few chapters, but that's a great way to add something to your book so you don't have to explain it through the chapters. I mean, then it's a given. You get into the world of Feral, Rabbit, and Nocturnal. We know it's set in the future. You know what year it happened when the final cataclysm happened. And, it's 100 years later or so, and everybody, there's no electricity anymore. And there's these werecats and these crazy creatures. So that helps me set it up. Same thing, I believe, with Phoenix Earth. I did the same thing. In that series, Phoenix Earth was like, the Earth had died. It was after the final cataclysm because all my books are tied in together. So, we went to Mars and we colonized Mars, but then we did the same thing to Mars we did to Earth. So then we fled to another planet called Malachar. And then, human Martians mixed with Malakarans, and then they came back to Earth to repopulate it. Well, if you didn't know that, you'd be like, what the heck is Malachar? Yeah, I mean, you watch Star Trek or Star Wars and boom, you're on another planet. But I do like to set that scene so you're already immersed in the world.
Yeah. Oh, so essentially, you feel like prologues are like a narration of what's to come or setting the stage?
For me, they are. I mean, that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be bound in that way. It could be anything.
I'm going to grab my book real quick.
Yes. Man, now you make me want to grab mine because I can't remember what I did these in. I know I didn't do it in DNA, didn't do it there. Shifters, maybe I did, kind of.
I know that I did, but I wanted to see. I couldn't remember. Oh, yeah. I did.
So why did you?
Well, it's interesting is because my prologue in Crystal Gate, I'm setting a stage for something that happens, a very small piece of the story, okay? But doesn't really get tied up until the second book. It's like, so I wrote this, I'm telling you about this guy, George, who's sitting at the front entrance of like a truck stop and he's watching a waitress. And then you kind of see these things happening. And, but then you don't realize he's watching this person to victimize this person. But then you see, I have some italicized things. There's an entity that's whispering into his ear to make him do these dark things. So you're seeing the process of him being guided through evil to do these things and making decisions based on whether or not he wants to follow through. And then it completely switches to chapter 1 and it's a total different character, and a definite different setting. And so I did that. And then I wrote the epilogue because this was a series, because I finished out the chapter with what happens in Crystal Gate, like literally leaving my people with a cliffhanger. So then I did my epilogue where you kind of see whatever happened at the very end. You kind of see a little picture of what's to come in the next book.
No, and I love that. Like if you're going to do a series, I love prologue, epilogue. You don't always have to have them, but they're a great way to build anticipation. So if you've hooked a reader and you have a prologue, and maybe you don't even mention that anymore in that book, and then you have an epilogue, like what's to come, you're left with two things, like what the heck, what was that beginning about? There was nothing ever else mentioned in that. Or
Mhm.
it's like mine, it's a given, you understand that's the world they're in, so it can
Right.
be an over foreshadowing or leave you with questions. So then you're like,
Mhm.
oh, I need another one of those books. You got to get me another book out. So yes, I don't really use epilogues a lot. I can see why they're really important. But I could see if I'm using an epilogue, it would kind of be like, well, I said this earlier before we started this, and it really isn't an epilogue, but like if you want to resolve, maybe you're at the end of the book, you're not going to write a series, or at the end of the series, and you're like, I want to resolve this so people know everything, how it turned out. So I
Mhm.
think about Harry Potter, all those movies and all the horror and fighting, he should not be named. And then at the very end, it's like so many years later, and here's Harry at the train station with his kids, and he looks over and sees Malfoy, and they just kind of nod at each other like it's a given, like, you know what, I know we didn't get along, but sorry. And so you know that Harry's okay. He got
Mhm.
married, they had children. So
Right.
you got to look at what's going to feed your reader to let you get the point across. And then again, it can also save you from like really diving in and have to write 5 chapters to explain something. I didn't want to
Right.
write 5 chapters and Farrell explaining, oh, this is what happened to the world. So I just said, this is what's going on, this happened in this year, and blah 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 blah, and bam, we're set for the scene.
Well, I was like, while you were talking, I was definitely listening, but at the same time, I went and grabbed my books because in Crystal Gate, I did the prologue, set that little scene. The scene was basically to set the the conversation of the whispering that happens throughout the entire book. So the whispering is a thing, a theme. But George is not. George is a very small part of the book, in very like sub-tertiary, like not even that big of a deal. Like it's kind of just setting how I'm writing with the whispering type stuff, the hearing of the voices. Like this is how this is going to kind of go through. You're going to see the evil working in their mind. Um and then at the end I had an epilogue for Crystal Gate. So I was wondering, like, did I write an epilogue for uh for Rivers, because I could pick it up if I wanted to. Like I've said that.
We
However,
talked about this. Yep.
yes. Yeah. So in For Rivers, what I did was a prologue. Um, and this prologue is kind of like another scene, and you see like things happening, and you see one of the characters walking somewhere, and you're like, what is happening? But I wrote a conclusion instead of an epilogue at the end of this one.
But you
So I
left it kind of open ended, so we could.
Well, yeah,
I
I
felt like
wrote
we
it.
did.
I wrote it as a conclusion, so that way I could sum it up if I never picked it back up. But I wrote a conclusion instead of an epilogue, for Rivers. Um, but even the conclusion itself could make a spinoff of a completely different series.
Yeah, but I also feel like if you write a conclusion, it can be considered an epilogue because you're wrapping up things that the reader may want to know. So
Right.
it's either a cliffhanger to carry it on,
Hmm.
or we're letting know where this ended, and you
Yeah.
may still have a couple questions, which is what I like.
Yeah. Well, then I got. Oh wait, what did I do in Before the World Was Lost in my nonfiction? I did an introduction, which is kind of like a prologue to a fiction book, but an introduction is saying, "Hey, this is what this book is going to cover. This is the basis. This is where we're going with this. This is kind of like a narration of what you're about to partake when you open these pages, but in a nonfiction way."
Yes, yes. I don't know if you did this with yours. I can't remember after reading it. Did you make your prologue in like italics?
No.
I have a habit, like I just grabbed Farrell, and now I remember the story in the beginning is just a prologue's a couple pages long, and it's Pippa having this conversation, and she's thinking about what happened to America, and she's like, children once played, or so I was told. The airborne death that swept across this country and wiped out America's civilization came in 2077, blah, 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 blah. And then I start chapter 1, and it says 3 hours earlier. So she was thinking, and as she was thinking out loud and going through the city where you could be raped or killed or whatever, even though it was protected from the ferals outside the city, a bad way to live, she was thinking about what she was told about life in America, how, wow, it was once really cool. You could walk out in the daylight, you never got stabbed or you got eaten by a creature. So I love that type of stuff, but I always have to do it in italics. So if it feels like, to me, I don't know, it just feels kind of mystified. Like, ooh, what
Mhm.
is this?
Yeah, and so that's a literally kind of like the way you use your fonts. Fonts are very important. There's a comic that shows this, how fonts are important. Like if they wrote the Declaration in like Comic Sans, like you wouldn't take it serious. Like font is everything. So even when you're italicizing something, you know it's not like it's a difference in what you're normally writing. Even when you do like, so when I'm writing and I have like, I'm trying to show a text message, I indent over, like I kind of move over, tab over with my writing and make it a little smaller, and it's more like inset from the other stuff.
Yeah, we do that. I do that in the similar impress books, especially like if I'm, how you got all your storyboards going on, just like we talked about in other podcasts. So if I'm switching gears and going to another character, another part of the story, I may double space and indent. So they're like, oh,
Yeah,
a whole new story arc right here developing.
right. Well, and so ironically, I do not have a prologue for Canvas.
Hmm.
Do you want to know why?
Yes, I do.
Because I had a couple people who read that say, "Oh, I never read the prologue. Why would you not read the prologue?" They're like, "Well, I just go to chapter 1." I'm like, "But there's so much information in the prologue, like that may help you with the story." And they're like, "Yeah, I just recover it."
No, I get it because it's so funny. I meant to say a minute ago, I was like, I like italics for that reason. Because most people are like, I don't need to know this crap, and they move on. I'm like, why would you
Why
skip
would you
a
skip that
part of
part?
the
You may
story?
literally may be like, "Why is this way?" I don't know. Maybe you should listen to the narration in the beginning of the story.
I can understand in a nonfiction book, there's sometimes like how to do this. I'm like, I don't need to hear your backstory of how you discovered this in 2021, when you was recovering from whatever, from
Hmm.
COVID. No, I want to get right to the point. But in a
Hmm.
fiction book, yes, read every single word. You're going to miss
Right?
something.
You're gonna miss
You know what
something.
we even did between the order of 5 books? We have this on the website. Um, we actually put stories in between to connect the books together. So there was
Hmm.
like, oh, let's give you a little extra story that's not in the print book or in the Kindle.
Hmm.
So, and that was kind of like a prologue for that series without having it in the book.
Hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people haven't read those though, but if you're a fan, you'll find it.
Yeah, I mean, and I wrote my first, so in Canvas, the first chapter, um, I wrote it as if it is a prologue, but I wrote it as chapter 1 because it's one of those things where it's a scene, things are happening, there's some italicized things, there's this mysterious, like what's happening, but it has something to do with the story, obviously, but it doesn't come to fruition until like you're like, oh my gosh, okay, now it makes sense. But I was afraid people wouldn't read it if it was in
But
a
you
prologue.
now you bring up a good point because now like I like prologues and epilogues, but in this day and age, who knows? You like you said, you just did a prologue. You just didn't italicize it. You didn't name it prologue. You went right to
Chapter 1.
yes.
But then chapter 2 is 10 years later.
Well, that's cool. You see that you watch Lost, and and you watch one episode, and then you come to the next one. It's like poof, it's something completely different. I just keep referring to it because I'm still mad about the ending.
Yeah, we talked about that like a couple weeks ago where we're
Yeah, I
like,
know it's not my ADHD or my dementia kicking in. I remember
I'm
that
still
one.
frustrated.
Yeah.
Still frustrated. Yeah.
So let's not even
Listen.
talk about Game of Thrones.
Yeah, the other one that we're still waiting for the actual real season 8.
Yeah.
My gosh. So,
Uh,
um
what's much to say? There's not a lot to say about prologue or epilogue. You got to look at it, and if you
well, and
feel
you have to decide. In summary, you have to decide what kind of stage are you trying to set. Isn't necessary. And like I don't know, like you kind of have to decide, do I put it in there? If I do put it in there and people don't read it, is it going to have information that they've missed? Or you could be like, did you read are you still confused? Go read the prologue.
exactly, I ought to change it in the future books and not prologue, and have all caps. Read this first.
Yes. Yes. But you know what though? And this is kind of like with the nonfiction. A nonfiction version would be the introduction.
Yep.
Um, I have a lot of college classes that I've taken where they require you to read the introduction. I'm like, and I'm reading like, why do I need to know this? This has nothing to do with the information. Like, I don't need to know why they wrote the story, like we talked about. So, like in my introduction, it doesn't really, it doesn't discuss the whys necessarily as much as it does like this is. So it's kind of like the big question, where did it really begin kind of situations where we always discuss like everyone wants to know. I go in there and kind of give my perspective of where I'm coming from. So when you read this, you know that I'm not trying to be a tell-all, know-all. I'm saying this is where I'm coming from. I'm writing this with a lot of overlapping religions. I'm writing this based on MUFON and I discussing things. I'm writing this based on a previous book that I wrote. These are the reasons I'm writing this. So when you read this, please take that into consideration. Plus, I've also collabed with other people who actually know what they're talking about in the archaeology world and the torsion energy fields, like people who this is their lifestyle that I've like collaborated with. So it's not like I'm just writing the book to tell you what we found.
You know, it's funny. I talked to you earlier because we're signing other authors, and when we just brought on working with his book the other day, I'm like, look, you have traveled all over the world. He's worked with like mystics and healers in Egypt and Eurasia, and he didn't mention any of that. I'm like, you have like 3 or 4 paragraphs for your introduction. You need to talk about that. And he wrote something beautifully. And as I'm reading, I'm like, this is gold. And I thought that thing. I'm like, no, it's introduction. Hardly nobody's going to read this, but at least it's there. John Bender, who wrote the Pigeon Trainer and the Birmingham Roller, you can see how thick that
Yes.
book is. It's like 200. Almost half that book, or at least a third of it, is an introduction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I was like, man, we could have wrote, because I made him tell his life story. Because with him being a world champion pigeon trainer and pigeon roller, and raising and all that, and martial artist, I'm like, I need to know all this. I need to know how you got into pigeons, when you found them, how you learned about collar crossbreeding. So it drove him nuts, but I made him go super deep, and it's like an autobiography within, in a how-to book.
Yeah, but that's the thing. People don't realize John and how John is connected and who he is. It's like he's just some guy in Southern Ohio who writes about pigeons. Yeah, but he's not. He's somebody way more than that.
Yeah,
So,
he's known worldwide, but if you're not to raising pigeons and doing things like that, you'd be like, huh? And then if you are new to that, you do need to know it. But I still know people be reading and be like, I don't need to know about this. I want to know how to train and feed my pigeon and build a coop. So they're going to jump ahead. But it's still there, So if you're thinking, I don't want to write an introduction or a prologue, you could do what Carissa does. You could tie it into chapter 1, or at the end of the day, don't skip it because you are afraid someone's going to say, I'm not going to read the prologue or the introduction. I never do. Somebody will. So, you know what? And if it's a fiction book and they have questions like, oh my God, I don't understand why they're in the future. And then you're in a fan group and they're like,
what year are we in?
Yeah, did you not read the prologue? Everything's laid out there.
The prologue of Star Wars goes across the screen.
Yes.
People read that. Well, not everybody,
but they do, because it's like this.
People have
It's like you're looking up and it's coming at you, and it's like, wow, that's so cool. The way
if you're watching a movie and it tells you like what year this is set, it's telling you what has previously. That's the prologue of the movie. It's setting the stage. So essentially, like, I mean, they're very important. I just wish people would quit skipping them.
So, write your prologue, write your epilogue if you need it. Don't skip reading them. Because, hey, if you're an author and you write one, but you're reading somebody else's stuff and you skip it, it's not fair to them. They're going to do that to you. And I just said it earlier. I skip the prologue and introduction and how-to books a lot. Okay, let me back up to save face. I do read them, but I'll speed read them. Unless it catches my
you're
attention.
A scammer.
Yes, I'm a
scammer as
well.
Oh,
I thought you said I was a scammer.
No, not scammers.
I was like,
those are people on Facebook.
You never know. Yeah, and Instagram and TikTok, but
yes.
No. So dive into it. Tell the backstory. Give them a cliffhanger. Lead them into the next book. Even if you're haven't even thought about the next book, you're like, this could be a series. Leave it hanging with that epilogue. to make them.
Mhm.
And then if your readers want it, then you're like, okay, I'm set up for the next story. Bam, I got to
Yeah.
get on this.
Yeah. And I
So
think that, yeah, I think that's the thing. And you have to realize your prologue, and I mean, we're talking prologues in fiction. Your prologue should be like that captivating part too, though. It should be that part that's almost like, this is the first thing I'm reading, make them want to read it. You
yeah,
know,
that's why I
make
keep mine
that,
short and like really like suspenseful.
yeah, mine's like a page essentially.
Yep,
Very
mine's
short,
one, two
like,
pages.
yeah. Not like maybe a front back type. So,
It's
yeah,
not like as long as this straw or anything, but
you and your water, just and the straws. But all right, this is a pretty cut and dry topic, but we definitely needed to cover it. We definitely needed to go over it because I feel like sometimes it can be confusing as to do I write it? Do I not write it? Are people listening? So it's kind of like you have to decide your story. Does it need a prologue? I think more people read epilogues though. So I think epilogues and things like that are definitely, once somebody's gotten to the story, they'll read the epilogue versus the prologue. I don't think people read as much.
yeah,
So
and if
maybe
you're at that
have
end
one
of the
and not the
story,
other.
you'll come back because you're like, ooh, what's coming up next? Ooh, maybe I missed something in the beginning. Let me go back and do it. I've actually done that in fiction books. So,
You've
you know,
done what in fiction books?
got to the end, and then I was so into the book, and I read the epilogue. And I was like, man, I did skip that prologue. This is when I was younger, and so I would go
Oh,
back and it's like, maybe
yeah.
I missed something. So let me read it because I need a little more.
Yeah. So we're here to advocate for prologues. We're here
Yeah,
to advocate.
we're prologue.
We're
Wait a
pro
minute.
prologues.
Yeah, that's much better. It's like
When I
prologue.
release this, yeah, when I release this, I'm gonna be like, we are pro prologues.
Yeah, don't let me say
Stop
it.
skipping your prologue. You're missing part of the story.
Hey, since you let me introduce this podcast,
Mhm.
should I practice like taking this out?
Ending it?
Yeah.
Yeah, try it.
Hey, well, thank you for joining us today in this episode of the Always Right Podcast. As always, you can follow us at alwaysrightpodcast.com, where we have all of our socials from Instagram to Facebook to listening to the podcast on Apple Music, on you watching us on YouTube, Amazon Music, and then something about we have an email. Yes, you can contact us at alwaysrightpodcast@gmail.com. We will answer your email as long as it has to do with any questions you have for future podcasts or past podcasts, or you need help writing or releasing your book. We're there for you. We do
No
not
spam.
respond to spam. Yeah, I was remembering it, and I don't know anything else to say, but I think it's like
You
we
did
have.
really good.
Okay, so well, thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Jamie Vendera, and this is.
Author Carissa DeLay.
Okay, let me know how I did. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
you, Carissa. I know.
I should do that on the thing. How did Jamie do? You did great. You did
All right,
great.
I'll get it better next time. I
Yes.
don't want to do it next time. I'm
All
just letting
right.
you know. I prefer
All
for
right.
you to
Thanks for listening. Until next time,
see it.
always right.